The development community has long recognized that institutions matter and that governance matters for poverty reduction. In fact, to say that institutions matter is somewhat axiomatic at this stage. What has been the challenge for the greater part of the last decade has been how development partners can support the development of institutions, how they can help improve the effectiveness and accountability of states. Of course, this agenda has taken on much greater urgency for a variety of reasons. One is the events in the Middle East and around the world, where the demand for more accountable governments and states and the political transition in these countries has given much more impetus to the good governance agenda. Second, the financial crisis and the resulting fiscal crisis in many countries also reinforces the importance of market institutions and effective public management. Third, there's much greater recognition of the challenges faced by conflict-affected and fragile states and the very basic challenges of state building. And fourth, following the recent high-level forum in Busan, Korea, the development partners and developing countries have come around to a consensus view on the importance of accountability, transparency, and institutional development, particularly in fragile states, but in all settings. These factors, these global factors, have converged to reinforce the importance of the governance and anti-corruption agenda, an agenda that was given particular emphasis in 2007 when the bank launched its GAC, Governance and Anti-Corruption Strategy, which is now in its fourth year of implementation. In fact, the bank is now preparing plans for a second phase of the GAC strategy, and one that has been informed by our evaluation of the first 3 years of implementation. Well, the bank continues to be involved in governance and anti-corruption work in virtually all the countries where it has operations. This was the case 10 years ago, it was the case 5 years ago, and it continues to be the case. And this usually takes the form of dialogue on public sector reform, investment climate, service delivery, or the demand for good governance. And so the bank continues to be an important partner for many countries in this regard. It has also made some progress. It's much more committed to investing in institutional development. In fact, in 3 times as many countries now as before the strategy was launched in 2007. It's much more willing to understand country realities. The bank has increased its use of political economy and institutional analysis in its projects and in project design systematically over the past 3 years. And it is also aware of the value of aid effectiveness principles in promoting good governance, and therefore its use of country systems, meaning public financial management and civil service systems, has expanded in Africa as well as in countries generally with weaker institutional capacity. There are some areas where the bank has yet to improve, and they are important to note because they can inform the work going forward. Its projects have not witnessed an expansion in the use of demand-side measures that could foster the demand for good governance, such as third-party monitoring. Its use of enhanced measures to manage fiduciary risks, such as preventive measures against fraud and corruption, and the use of results measures to track how far institutional performance has been improving. These are areas where the bank can do better, as well as its approach to lending risks, where there is a widespread perception, both internally and externally, that the bank's lending objectives and its good governance objectives are at times in conflict, particularly when countries are going through governance downturns or governance crises. Well, we have several lessons both about what the bank can do in countries to improve institutions, but also what it can do to support change management more effectively within the bank itself. What we found was that the need to improve and fill some of the gaps that I had identified in the bank's portfolio depends in part on having enough time to effect change. But we also found that the design of the strategy as well as the implementation plan in 2007 had some gaps and some weaknesses that should be rectified in order to make systematic improvements going forward. Specifically, the implementation of the strategy, in our view, was too internally focused on the bank's own capacities, resources, and its reputation as a development institution, and not focused enough on country capacities and country challenges. The bank's approach to risk was narrowly focused on investment operations and the transactions within investment operations, rather than on the systems in the countries in which all bank operations are being supported. So a streamlining of this risk framework and a smoothening of it that cuts across operations and cuts across instruments is necessary. And the third is that the bank's implementation arrangements were a bit fragmented and they're not aligned with its own operational processes, and that made it difficult for the GAC agenda within the bank to be sufficiently focused on frontline operational concerns. First and foremost, GAC Phase 2 and the plans for it should be developed and launched as soon as possible. Many country clients, civil society organizations, as well as staff within the bank are seeking the guidance that GAC Phase 2 can provide. In our view, the mantra for GAC Phase 2 should be to build country capacities rather than the bank's own capacities, to develop operational solutions and innovate those operational solutions around building country institutions. And we think that it's important to do that in 3 or 4 areas that we highlighted in the evaluation. Core public sector institutions, including the civil services in countries, institutions that support the investment climate, sectoral institutions that ensure the delivery of basic and essential services, and mechanisms to support social accountability and the demand for good governance. Now, in order to see innovation in these areas, each one of which is unique, it requires a risk framework in the bank that is streamlined and harmonized across instruments. Thus far, the focus has been too much on transaction-level risks in investment operations. We argue to move to a systems-level risk framework for the bank that sets broad risk tolerances and allows the bank to innovate. The bank will also need better metrics as well as new instruments to support this. Finally, an important piece of this will be to streamline the implementation arrangements within the bank so that change management can be much more cost-effective and much more oriented towards frontline delivery concerns, frontline operational concerns.